So the title of what I have to share with you today is A Brief Meditation on the Questioning of Value. Everybody talks about value, knows value, or the value, or when something is valuable, and that something or someone has value to someone, to others, to most, to them alone, or to no one. Every one of us humans seem to understand, but still, or perhaps for this reason, very rarely someone asks, what's value? When this question is asked directly at first, value seems to be like a thing or an attribute of things or persons or occasions or places or events. However, as soon as the attempt is made at answering this direct question, it becomes quite evident that value is something that is attributed to something always in a context which it shares with everything else. Typically, a decision and a differentiation are involved, both of which resting on the same principle that serve as basis or foundation. In the modern, philosophically liberal world, which is the one whose conditions of creation I find Trinket, Kapwani's exhibition, powerfully comments, in that world, the prevailing claim, which is the one that contractualist philosophers and later ones put at the very foundation of the law, constitution, and their guiding principles, such as necessity, liberty, property, equality. In that world, the prevailing claim is that life carries the highest value. Therefore, it will always be chosen if a decision needs to be made, if a choice is in front of somebody. And that which is chosen to be protected or rewarded is that which has higher value, price or cost, or is more valued, esteemed, such as, living things have more value than non-living things. So that is to say that value is not a thing or an attribute of a thing, of an event or a circumstance, because value itself is often also a question, particularly when it is in question. A question that imposes itself when, under given critical circumstances, in face of disturbing unexpected events, or before, never seen before or never heard of thing, there is an attempt to account for how it is then, or how has always been possible. When did it become imaginable, or why has it become acceptable, and how is it now bearable? When considered in these circumstances, the question of value comes to the fore precisely because one is forced to give an account of it, because in these moments, value itself is in the balance. Not, however, directly, for attempts to account for how that which is unusual, which become pervasive in critical circumstances, so how that which is unusual has suddenly become imaginable, possible, acceptable, and bearable. That cannot but make it evident that value cannot possibly belong to a thing, an occasion, or an event. Value is about everything. Take the current situation of the planet itself. Each day shows more and more signs of a distressed climate, which signals that it may happen sooner than was expected, that it will no longer be a welcome place for living things. Of those living things, the most affected by the climate catastrophe are those whose lives have been consistently treated as not being worthy of protection or preservation, namely those of non-human animals and non-white humans. For when the attention is given to how this unusual critical situation, the climate catastrophe, is unfolding, the impossible, unimaginable, unacceptable, unbearable reality that is the fact that that very soon this planet will no longer be able to sustain life. Well, when before that, attending to that, one cannot miss how it is unequally distributed, that many are more affected than others, and that the degree of harm gives indeed a measure of how something or someone is esteemed, of their worth, of how they are valued. And that's the same for the quotidian critical catastrophes, like that which became quotidian, the COVID-19 global health crisis, but also the total violence which takes the form of local or regional wars, that total violence proliferating in the Congo DRC, in Sudan, and in other places in the African continent, in Yemen, in Palestine, and the other countries in the Middle East, and as drug wars in Mexico, Brazil, El Salvador, Jamaica, and other countries of Latin America, and the Caribbean. In all such unusual and quotidian critical situations, in which these very foundations, the principles which provide the grounds for decisions, the principles of modern existence are at stake, it becomes evident that value is not a subject or a predicate or even the copula, but it is the very question questioned. That is, in cases in which life itself is not only at stake, but is so unprotected that it is a matter of counting and wondering how many more will be lost, the consideration of value no longer involves solely deciding or choosing between unequal or dissimilar things. These scenes of value challenge us to reconsider the basis for the decisions, precisely because they cannot but expose the very grounds of fact or of the fact of differentiation. What we find in this current crisis, the decisions so far indicate that profit matters more than life, that the needs of capital have acquired so much more importance, value, than that they cannot be sacrificed, that it must become possible, imaginable, acceptable, and bearable, that life will not be preserved or protected if doing so will negatively impact the needs of capital in any way or form. Even in the face of such radical departure, this unexpected ideological masking, the question, what's value, does not arrive, because it is evident that value is what guides the decision to protect, and value is inseparable from the foundations of the decision, which are the foundations of the liberal, in the philosophical sense, political architecture that is of state capital, to the world of global state capital that is to the one sustained by the colonial racial cis-heteropatriarchal matrix. The question of value can only be presented as the questioning of its foundations, and the ambiguity of this statement must hold. A question which is more than anything an invitation to interrogate the very basis of differentiation between life and profit, the base which set up the choice, the decision that obtains the value attributed to anything and everything or everyone or anyone. Towards contributing to the questioning of the foundations of the liberal political architecture, and hopefully contribute to a thinking that will stop its pendulum that oscillates from the democratic mode in which justice, liberty, and equality are celebrated, and the fascistic mode, like right now. A few years ago, I created a performative image object concept, which I call the equation of value, but which is basically a speculation on Black Lives Matter. So 3 things to keep in mind as I go through this with you, which is the questioning of value part of the presentation. One is that there is a collapsing of the form of life and value that happens at some point. that I treat value in 3 registers of modern value: ethical, mathematical, and grammatical, so as differentiation. And that blackness here refers to the category, the construct of modern knowledge. So I begin with the grammatical and try to see how the figuring of opposition as contradiction would work in relation to Black life. Life is obviously the form, and a positive position in regards to life is figured as 1, and you have that, and then the negative as -1. Now, the key of the exercise of its questioning of value is to provide an account of opposition that figures nullification instead of contradiction. And that would render the analytical gesture that I call negativation, which is a radical departure from modern thought and the world of value it has created. So how the figuring of opposition as contradiction would work in relation to Black life. So first in I, and then in I, and then the 2 I's, I and I figure life, which hosts ethical value in modern philosophy, as the form, and the positive position to it is 1, and then the negative is -1. So reading the category of Blackness as reference of negative life, life with negative value, life that does not matter, you have 3, okay? Blackness equals -1. And then the second move, there I play with mathematical value, which is the one that counts for the counting, for the economic. That is, I figured the relationship between life 1 and Blackness -1 using basic procedures: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Nothing sophisticated. So when I add, life plus Blackness, because Blackness has negative value, the adding becomes a subtracting. So 1 life minus 1 Blackness plus -1 Blackness equals 0. I find that when simply combined with life, then Blackness brings about nullification. That is, when added to the positive form of life, Blackness obliterates it. Here, the category of Blackness is treated within a context defined by the form of life and the position it occupies in regards to it. That is, Blackness equals not life. So I need to take another step if I want to get out of the form of life and the form of value. So in that, I try to express the relationship between Blackness, now 0, and life 1 in terms of effectivity. That is, I deploy the category of Blackness in a way through which I attempt to return the total violence it gathers as a modern symbol, as a formal tool, and it gathers that total violence precisely because of how it consistently authorizes it. So the idea is to use the violence that the symbol carries as a weapon of analysis. So to do that, I do a multiplication and a division. So in B, you have 1 life multiplied by -1 Blackness, that equals to -1, and I do the other, and then I divide. Again, I get Blackness, I get negative life, I get -1. So life actually gathers this negative expression as Blackness -1, that is as lack, as known, or as a symbol of absence of life. So Blackness negativity takes over life. So the next move is to take Blackness power to annihilate life, as in the A, the one on the top, and deploy it to multiply life. So that's 4, life equals 1, 5, Blackness equals 0. So what you find these 2 results that blackness. Okay, yeah. Am I repeating this thing? No, it's fine. And that blackness multiplied by life multiplied by -1 equals -1, and then life multiplied by 0, blackness will equal 0. So the movement in both cases is violent. In both, we have a refiguration of the dialectics. So in D, negativity, blackness engulfs value. Value becomes -1. And in E, it destroys it. Life becomes equals to 0. So D is life without value, and that is blackness -1 disappears with life. And in E, blackness is a figuring of the absence of form. Blackness equals 0, disappear with the form. Life equals 1, and releases 0, which here stands as matter itself. So taking it a step further yet, it might be possible to move away from the dialectics, to have this one, or what I'm calling merely oppositional thinking, which retain the form of life, and which is also key to value in modern thought. And moving away of it, and also moving away from its deployment of effectivity, which cannot but reproduce violence. And the way I move to do so is F, which I hope is in there, yeah, which is dividing life by 0, by blackness, by matter itself, which you see gives infinity minus infinity, or infinity divided by infinity. So instead of sublation, which is what we show in B, or obliteration, like sublation, which, blackness engulfs life, as we see in B, in D, or obliteration, the disruption of life, as we see in E, this procedure has no result because it is impossible. You can't divide something by 0. I've chose infinity minus infinity to describe it, or infinity divided by infinity, because it's a picture of that which is undeterminable, that which has no form. So it's not that something indeterminate that is yet to be determined, but it's that something that you can never say exactly what it is. Hence, you can never give it any value. It doesn't fit in that economy, in that symbolic economy, or whatever. So it has no form. It is infinity minus itself, or divided by itself. It's neither life nor non-life, or not life. It is content without form, or what I use the term materia prima, or raw material, or is that which has no value because it exists as infinity without no form. Thank you for the patience.